Hey, all right. Good day to you. Welcome to the Gospel Jazz. We definitely have some improv, conversational improv about life, leadership, and Jesus. We are going to do at least part 2 here on thriving. Flourishing.
Get the word right.
Well, see, that's what I'm thinking. I'll connect thriving in a minute. Flourishing. So we talked about Tove. Being a church of goodness, a place of goodness, a people of goodness. Mm-hmm. And so now I think really diving into some of the practical aspects, then how do we attain that? How do we chase after that?
So if you as a listener or a watcher are jumping in, we kind of began unpacking this an episode ago. So if you haven't listened to that one might be helpful. We're not going to recap all of that. One of the questions that we asked and kind of teased last episode was the idea of fear. And how does fear in our culture limit, not access to, but I guess the experience of flourishing? There have been a number of articles written, and I think there might even be a book or two that is out on just the fear of our culture, how that has seeped into the church in America. And so one of the, and I couldn't find this article specifically, but it asked this question: evangelicals are more afraid now than ever before. And just kind of surfing the question of why that is. What is it that is creating this sense of fear? And that that has kind of become a rallying point for a lot of churches, is let's unite in our sense of fear, and how that really rides against the entire nature and existence and message of Jesus.
Yeah, this is tough. I think, as I've shared with you guys, we're going through the Sermon on the Mount, and so you have things there, right, of turn the other cheek, of go the extra mile, right, of I think of Jesus's parable of building the bigger barns, and that's some of this our discussion beforehand of this whole hobby collection that I've picked up. I mean, the same thing. This guy passes away and has a basement and a house full of hobby stuff. And again, and that's nothing against people's hobbies, but you go, he had plans for all this stuff. I'm sure he did. But now he's not here to enjoy it. Right, and so the same thing, the fear, the scarcity.
Because you had said most of what you found was still in boxes, had never been opened.
Yeah, and I think it's true with anybody's hobby or whatever you're interested in. I mean, you always pick up something because you have a plan, right? Oh, I'm going to use that for this.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, that's going to be great with these guys, or and then 12 years later, you're like, oh man, we never got around to doing that. Right. We never went on that fishing trip. We never, whatever. Yeah. And so, I don't know what it is about the fear. We've talked about this too, I know, but at least in our area, we have all these signs of faith over fear. Which, again, my biblical, can I say smartassery? Whatever. It says, it's love, right? It's love, love over fear, right? Yeah. It's not faith. I mean, I think back at the very beginning of the pandemic. We had another couple that we were friends with, not really part of the church, but they have a big family like we have. And the same thing was just wanting to get together like on a Sunday, maybe at our house or at their house, and like just do some house church stuff. And I'm ashamed to admit it, right? And my wife were like, no. And I mean, I look back at that and go, man, how dumb, right? Because that would have probably been some awesome times, right? To bring a couple families together, right? Have some flourishing, right? Have, and especially, those first few months of the pandemic, like, what did we probably both really need in that moment? We needed that, and we missed out. Or at least so. Not thriving. So here's my thriving. This summer for high school week of camp, the theme was thrive. And so that's what I've been thinking about a lot, kind of looking at some of that stuff. And it's the same thing, just some of those spiritual practices and things that help you flourish.
And it's kind of interesting to talk about flourishing and fear. The struggle in our culture is, and this is really a mark of our time, is if you are not saying exactly the same thing as I am, you're against me. Mm-hmm. And so when someone doesn't demonstrate the same level of fear that you have, you instantly, there is angst that comes up. There is energy now to discredit that individual. It's kind of funny. One of the things that I had read that I was thinking about in relation to this topic is Tim Keller. Tim Keller is, I don't think he is the current pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City. I think his health has required him to step back, but he's still doing some writing and that kind of stuff. Now, Tim Keller wrote, and this was back in 2018, he wrote an article that just talked about politics and the Jesus-oriented life, and he got just run roughshod over because he took a nuanced approach and didn't buy into and didn't give in to the fear. He said, look, basically, he was saying, look, the political system in our country does not fit squarely within the model of Jesus. There is not one particular side or political party, and this might frustrate some people that may be listening, the 10 people that listen to this. But he was very clear on saying, look, the way of Jesus doesn't fit within Republican or Democrat. Brian Zahn says this all the time. I don't follow the donkey and I don't follow the elephant. I follow the lamb. He is saying the very same thing. Now, that is a nuanced approach, because one of the things that Keller says, and I'll just give this really simple quote. He says, another reason not to align with Christian faith with one party is that most political positions are not matters of biblical command, but of practical wisdom. Oh, you mean the Bible doesn't specifically address the policy that my favorite candidate is talking about? Yeah, that's right. So there is some practical wisdom that has to be exercised, and my idea of how that wisdom plays out doesn't give life to the fear, but talks about the way of living faithful to Jesus that might be different than how you might think about it. And we have to make room for that.
Yeah. Well, and this is something just to, we're filming this just a couple days after the midterm elections. Yeah. Again, having a historical perspective of these things, you go, and again, as much as, because it's all about clicks, right? I mean, we're in that world right now where who can, so it's red wave this or blue tsunami, whatever. You go, this is the ebb and flow that our elections have really historically always had, right? Is it the midterms? There's usually a little bit of course correction to whatever party's not in the White House. I mean, it's just how it goes, right? And then
it's almost like the founding fathers could have seen this coming and said, if we swing one way, what is a way that we might correct and bring us back towards the middle?
Exactly. And again, I think our system is obviously way far from perfect, but you go, I've been to other countries where the systems are even worse, and there is literally blood in the streets.
Right.
And we don't have that, thankfully, and hopefully we never will. And to me, that's why, you go back to the passage where Paul says, look, just pray for the king, pray for those in authority, and you try to live a peaceful life. Right?
Yeah. You posted that scripture the other day. Maybe it was on election day, of try to be at peace with people as much as possible. That's our call.
And how do we keep the drumbeat of Jeremiah 29? But it's that same thing, right? Man, build your house, plant your garden, get married, start a family, focus on that, because that's what matters.
Yeah.
And to me, with the whole flourishing conversation, I mean, that's the and again, and I'm preaching this to myself because I get caught up in this politics stuff. I get and at some
it's
point,
really easy.
Oh my gosh, with social media and everything. I think, and that's part of it, right? It's just. It's a social contagion of its own.
Yeah, right.
We've been conditioned to believe that the government is the source of our flourishing, right? Source of a great many things, but in the context of this conversation, right, flourishing, that if we get the right political party in power, they'll pass a law so that all people can flourish and have, a wealthy, happy, healthy life, whatever.
Yeah.
And as we've already talked about with fear, they typically do it through fear. Make you afraid of the other side. The other side is out to get you. And right now, it's, if I can be specific, it's the Republican Party that's beating that drum because they're the ones who haven't been in power, right?
Sure.
The big, mean Democrats are going to come and take away all your guns and all your rights, and they just want to kill your babies. And that has nothing to do with what's actually happening.
Right.
Nor does it actually have a great deal of impact on our capacity to flourish in the places that God has put us. In my Poverty 101 seminars that I do, I always end it by talking about the fact that the solutions to poverty for our community are within our community.
That's what I was.
They're not in our case Lansing or in Washington D.C., but they're right here.
Yeah.
I mean, now some of that comes out of the context of properly understanding poverty, that it is a lack of resources to participate in community. Right. It's not about a dollar amount.
Right.
But helping people realize that we have the capacity to cultivate a flourishing community right here. And that leads to the question of what role does the church have in producing that?
Boy, we're like on the same wavelength. Fear produces laziness.
Oh yeah.
Because let's just take the abortion example, right? So you go, okay, so my state governor, whoever didn't go along with whatever, however I feel on that issue. So then you go, well, okay. So then if you really, if you really truly feel passionate about this, then what are you doing to try to reach out to women, right, who find themselves in a crisis pregnancy, right? Are you getting involved in your local, maybe with your pregnancy service, whatever, or let's say it goes the other way, right? You go, okay, we finally got a Supreme Court that, okay, whatever, but it's laziness, again, because you go, okay, so let's say we have another 800,000 kids that get born next year.
Yeah.
You going to start an orphanage? You going to start a home for unwed mothers out of your church? I mean, these are the kind of things that you go, and to me, and I think that's where most of the rhetoric just gets lost, because you go, well, if I just vote, right, it's laziness, right? Well, it'll just all work itself out.
We can vote our way into prosperity. We can't. That's the idea, right?
You're right.
We can vote our way to prosperity.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Or some sort of moral superiority or whatever. But you go, there's still work to be done. And
if that is true,
any of those issues, whichever way you go, there's work to be done.
And if it is true, if it were true that we could vote our way into prosperity, it would only be true locally, right? What are the biggest local elections? If now we're talking about elections, but local elections, right, have the greatest impact. Have the greatest impact on the daily lives of the people right here in our community. If you want the ability to flourish and do well in this community, then elect people to your school boards, your county commissions, your city councils and commissions who will do things to make this community better. Because your representatives and your senators at the state and national level, they don't care about your zip code. Only in so much that your zip code continues to vote for them. But they don't really, they don't really care, nor do they know what it needs, what your neighborhood needs. So if there's ever a way to vote your way into prosperity, it's only locally. It's only through local involvement and running your local neighborhood and community in a way that is conducive to flourishing.
Well, this goes back to the stuff I just sent you. We were talking about before we hit record, the idea that it's called Price's Law, right? Just this idea that the bigger your organization gets, the more essentially wasted space you have with people not doing the work. And so you're right. The smaller that you can keep things, the more people you actually have then, right, that are actually working, that are actually flourishing, right, who are bought into the process. And I mean, I think you guys have already seen that too, right, with the Hope House. That you go, there are some people who just get it, right? They're on board, they catch the vision, right? They have a passion for that ministry and providing that service for the county. And then there's some people that, right, they're just there for a paycheck if they ever cash them. Sorry, is that too? Yeah. Sorry, edit that out. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, and so that's the thing, right? I think, like you said, on a church level of going, look, all of these hot button issues. Again, right? I tell my people all the time, who cares what they're going to decide in Lansing? Right? Who cares what they're going to decide in D.C.? Because you're right, it's Gratiot County, it's St. Louis. That's who we need to care about. So what happens with the girl that has a crisis pregnancy in our community? Are we gonna love on her and support her and encourage her? And I mean, or are we just gonna go, well, we can't do that because she's not married and okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So, even within the idea of flourishing, and again, that's not a word that a lot of people use. That's not a part of our 21st century middle of Michigan lexicon. It's probably really not a part of the lexicon of most of America. So, we often think of flourishing in terms of, and I think we maybe defined this from a pop culture standpoint last episode. We want to define flourishing as what is best for me and as an individual. It doesn't give much voice to the community. It doesn't give much voice to anything that is beyond who I am. But, and I don't remember where this came from. This is probably an amalgamation of a lot of different things I had been listening to and reading over the last probably 6 or 8 months. Flourishing as potentially defined for the Christ follower. Is there a radical, sacrificial nature or aspect to following Jesus, or is it just about making me happy? Because the entire call, the entire life of Jesus, he says consistently, he says more than anything else, he says, do not fear. Do not be afraid. When angels show up and it is terrifying and people have a reason to be afraid, that is one of the first things that the angels consistently say. If people recognize it, that it's a supernatural being at all, they say, don't be afraid. So fear is as far as you can get from Jesus. So what Jesus does talk about is the sacrificial nature of a life. And this is something we talk about all the time, the cruciform nature of Jesus. One that is willing to sacrifice the entirety of life for purposes related to Jesus and for Jesus.
You know, you said flourishing really isn't part of our lexicon, and I agree. I think we tend to use words more that's maybe synonymous, but I think has a different connotation. Words like prosperity, which is also in Scripture, right? We did talk about prosperity last week and about defining it as shalom, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I think the connotation of prosperity is economic, right? It gives that sense of economics more. Whereas flourishing, I think, gives us a sense of kind of a holistic sense of what do we need to live life well, right? I mean, I think of, and I am not a gardener, so you'll really appreciate this, but nobody says they have a prosperous garden, right?
Right.
Maybe a prosperous farm, right? Because it's an economic source, but you would say you could say your garden is flourishing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Which is, it has this bounty of beauty and life, right? And I think of John 10:10, I have come to give you life and give it to you more abundantly. One of the guys that I like to follow on Facebook, I think we've all kind of seen his stuff, is Ben Kramer. Yep. And he shared something this week. If our Christianity causes us to only care about what people believe theologically, and not if people have all that they need to survive, be healthy, be successful, and flourish, then our picture of salvation is simply not as big as Jesus. And I just, that idea and that statement that in the church in particular, we have emphasized so much. You have to believe the right things, and being saved or being a Christian is just ascribing to certain beliefs. It's all been about right belief, ascribing to certain truths, right, holding these.
Yeah.
When the reality is, it's about so much more than that, and we have really lost ourselves, I think, in trying to make sure everybody believes the right things, instead of asking the questions: do people have what they need to flourish? Because Jesus says, I've come to give life and give more abundantly. And that's not like a one-off little comment. Right? That's not interpreting an obscure. That is a picture of all that Jesus comes to do. He never sits down with anybody in his ministry and says, so let's talk about your beliefs. I said this on Sunday. Nowhere did Jesus go, so how is it with your soul? Right? The closest he gets is like the woman at the well, and he's like, if you knew who I was, you'd ask for water, I would give you living water, right? That's the most spiritual his conversations really get. 9 times out of 10, it's what do you need to flourish? You need to see, I will restore your sight. You need to walk, I will restore you, right? You need to live, I'll raise you back to life. I mean, it is.
And if eternity was the only thing that really mattered, Jesus wouldn't need to do anything. He would have just said, hey, go to heaven now. You can walk and run and jump. You can see up there. Go to heaven now. You don't need to be here.
Right.
He doesn't do that.
He does, and again, if we understand, first of all, that this was first century Jewish community, that Jesus was a Jewish rabbi fulfilling Jewish prophecy, right? So he was not an Anglo-Saxon, prophet. So I mean, and I said that kind of a smart-assery, but like it really does matter.
It does,
because to contextualize what he's doing, right? those people he serves, the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery, the people who's healed over and over again, the demoniac, right, and
the lepers,
and the Gerasene, yes,
Yeah.
these are
Samaritan.
people whose lives are not flourishing.
Right.
They have no community. They have no sense
Yeah.
of being. They have no agency. They are resigned to their ailments and to whatever has possessed them. Their encounters with him opens the door to flourishing, not to spiritual well-being, and not to accurate theological belief.
My only pushback to that is that in that ancient text or that culture, right? They were damned already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
On a spiritual sense, right? I mean, he was born blind, right? Because his parents sinned, or he sinned, right?
Right.
He's obviously crippled because he doesn't believe right, or he doesn't, So I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think it's just the other side of that coin where you go, they were already written off. Their theological beliefs were already written off anyway.
So is Jesus
the same point?
Is he addressing assumed spiritual issues in a
is
different way?
this is-
saying, no, you assume this is a spiritual problem. It's not.
Well, and that's I think about the guy that gets lowered down through the roof, right, where he says your sins are forgiven. And they're like, what? No, whoa.
Can't do that.
He says, look, I'll prove you I can do that too. Why don't you get up and walk, right? So that you can, and again, without getting into the health and wealth thing, right? But now you can walk, so you can have a job, right? You can quite literally run around with your friends or your family or maybe your kids, right? Or and experience, as you said, flourishing the life, the Zoe life. That's the Greek word, the zoo. And so that's why I think I think take my kids down. Same thing, your kids down at Potter's Park Zoo there in Lansing, which is not the greatest zoo in the world, but that's terrible. We need them as a sponsor. It's a great zoo. It's a fun zoo, and. But the same thing, right? I watched, especially when my kids were littler, right? But it was like every corner that they would turn, it was like, oh, man, right? There was something new, right?
Yeah.
There was something cool to see. There was something cool to experience, something to do, something to engage in. And to me, that's what I think Jesus is talking about, right? This is the life, right? I want you to have a life where every day, every moment, right? There's something new. There's something exciting. There's something fun to engage in. There's somebody to minister to, right? There's somebody to help out. And you can't do that. Right, you can't do that when your physical limitations keep you from that, and potentially your spiritual. And I hear what you're saying, where we see those spiritual needs almost, I don't want to say take a back seat, right? But it's one of those things that you go, these people need to eat, right? They've come out here to hear me teach, but nobody's going to pay attention if they don't have some food, and get some food in their bellies, right? And Jesus, are we going to get so much?
Not that Jesus isn't concerned with people's spiritual well-being.
Sure.
But what Jesus understood, because he was, after all, there at the beginning of creation, and he knows how we were woven together. Right?
Sure about that.
That these are not two separate... We are not a body with a soul.
Yeah.
Or we are not a soul with a body, right? We are body and soul.
Yeah.
We are, in some way...
His incarnation.
Yeah,
Yes.
right?
Right? I mean, that's
That's just it. And of course, again, Jesus being God understands that
wait.
that these two things are not separate from each other. So he comes to deal with both. The problem. So my corrective is that in the church over the last half a century or more, all we focused on is the spiritual, the soul, and completely disregarded. We've become Gnostics. It's just it's not. Everything comes back to Gnosticism.
That was our favorite topic in the first
Gnosticism shows up everywhere.
Yeah,
but I mean, that's kind of my corrective, and then understanding too that forgiveness of sin and all those things is part of brokenness, not guilt. Right? He's not come to arbitrate a courtroom as much as he has to heal, and healing goes hand in hand with. Thank you, medicinal atonement theory. We'll nod to that.
There were two more things that I was kind of thinking about in regards
We're all over the place.
Yeah, we are. To flourishing.
Our conversation's flourishing.
Flourishing and fear, those two kind of as kind of our theme for today.
We got way off the field.
Two things. That's our...
No, it's great. That was a good conversation.
One of the things, I think you and I have been talking about this, if the gospel is good news, then it's good news through the difficulty and the hardship. This is why flourishing isn't about what is just best for me and me having a good time and all of my needs met. We struggle with that application in a world that is built by and for us, and that it is largely good. And you've traveled a lot more than we have to really desolate places. We have the ability in our country to answer a lot of our own questions, to heal a lot of our own problems, to fix our own stuff. And the good news for Americans often looks like Jesus just making your life a little bit better. That kind of gospel doesn't travel well. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the good news isn't just about getting out of the struggle. The good news is experiencing the flourishing of Jesus in the midst of the hardship. Because the flourishing isn't just about my life going well.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's Jesus says, I've come to proclaim good news to the poor, right? The good news is not that I've come and now you no longer have to be poor and all your financial woes are solved, right? No. It is God is with you in the midst of your poverty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's evangelism strategy, right? We have in the evangelical church, we have specialized financial management as an evangelism, right?
Yeah.
But what Jesus, he doesn't come to make poor people middle class people.
Yeah.
He comes to bring redemption in the midst of our poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Man, if the church can understand that it's not our job to solve the woes of people's lives, right? It is not our job to solve your grief. It's our job to sit with you in it.
Yeah.
It is not our job to solve your poverty. It is our job to shoulder it with you. It is not our job to fill in the blank.
Yeah.
It is our job to be incarnate.
I've heard you talk about this in regards to Job. Job's friends do a really good job showing up and sitting with him until they open their mouths.
Yeah.
They start talking and it all goes down the toilet.
It does. Right. Could you just...
Because we try and explain the grief and the hardship, and that often does not work.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we just have to be honest, there aren't good answers for some of the crap that goes on in the world. There just isn't.
In most people, and this is, again, just a little pushback, most people I think are well-intentioned.
Yes.
But,
sure.
right,
yes.
It's just stupidity, right? We don't like silence. This I don't know if we're going to get to Sabbath here or anything.
So
but,
there is something when we talk next time about Sabbath, about that exactly. This was revolutionary in my mind about what Sabbath and flourishing and the interplay of those things. So yeah, we're going to land there.
Because this, my sister and I have psychoanalyzed this and a little bit with my mom, and again, my mom had dementia and stuff, but it was one of those things too where my mom would ask, I don't know about asinine questions, but I mean just questions that you're like, the answer to that. And I do the same thing. I drive my wife nuts, she can tell you, and I don't think it's dementia. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Yet.
But part of it is just that thing of like, oh, we need something else to talk about, right? They're silent. Hey, so what were the plans for tonight? Like, I'm 99% sure I know what they are, but it just frustrates Chris.
And she's like, "Why are you asking?"
I know, right? Why are we talking? We don't need to talk. And so, that's.
So the thing where our
can you just be present? Right? Can you just be present in whatever the mess is?
So when the mess doesn't have answers, we get scared, which is entirely fair. That's a human response to, I don't know what's going on here, and we get scared. So I don't think the fear in and of itself is the problem. It is what we do with it, and it is what, maybe even more to the point, it is what others do with it, because fear has this void, and some people run into that void and try and wield power. There were, and again, I don't know where this came from, because I have like these notebooks that I write in. I got 3 of them sitting here. The notes for this came out of 3 different books, and I was just looking through. I didn't even intend for this to be a part of today, but it worked really well. There were 3 questions that I had written down. When people traffic in power, we need to ask questions. And maybe this just begins with us. When we kind of wield power, we need to ask at least 3 questions. Is the power being used in redemptive ways? Does the use of power point to God, or does it draw more power to me? And does this power elevate others? Because Jesus was surrounded by power. He used power, but he doesn't use it in ways that tear apart others that are in need. He challenges the existing power, but he doesn't do it he challenges the power in redemptive ways. He doesn't seek to draw more power to himself. And the power that he wields is elevating others around him. I mean, you think about the engagement with, like you were mentioning, those that are hurting, the lepers, the people who have been healed, that can't walk, that can't see. His use of power is elevating those individuals in redemptive ways. And if we don't do that, the fear has the opportunity to grow and become out of control.
Man, there's something there with the 10 lepers. I don't know. That's good. Well, I'm just, because even once they have that life-altering encounter with Jesus, right, you really only have the one that returns, right, with any sort of thankfulness. And again, I'm sure the other 9 guys were happy and ecstatic, and I don't know, something I haven't chased it down.
Yeah.
Yet.
Well, it's one of the.
Because I think that's. I mean, how often do we see? Right, we see this as pastors, right? People have these great encounters with Jesus, and then just go on about their lives, like nothing ever happened, and nothing. And you're like, did you not see that?
Yeah.
Did you not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just talking.
We would never do that kind of a thing.
I was just talking with somebody yesterday, and her heart was breaking over a daughter that has had some pretty spectacular encounters with God, some physical healings. I mean, in long story short, this young lady should be dead. She had a horrific accident for whatever reasons God has determined. She did not die. So but now she is kind of stepping away from her faith. She's having a crisis of faith. And she just said, why do you think that she is doing this? Referring to the daughter. And I just said, some of this is the frustration of life. So she is aware enough and understands enough that life should look different for her. She's now in, I think, her mid-20s. And she's not able to do the things that a mid-20-year-old young woman should be able to do because part of her body did not recover from the accident. And I said, I have no doubt that her heart is still soft towards God, but the frustration and the fear and the anger has become the dominant thing that is kind of guiding her decisions right now. And the best we can do is, fear creates an opportunity to either lean into love or lean into power. And as Christians, as Christ followers, we have one option. And it is not the power option. Because that's not what Jesus does. Jesus consistently says, you will be known by your exercise of power or influence, political position. Oh, no, it's love. You'll be known by how well you love others. That's it. That's the option. I think we forget that sometimes.
Make sure they believe like we do.
Right. Well, it's the harder option.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
Right, because even the power stuff, even that to some extent is just lazy or easy.
I agree.
Easier, maybe lazy is not the right word, but
we have lots of models, so we can go. Well, okay, they exhibited power this way, so we can pull some of that over here. And I don't really like them, but their modes were pretty good. Yeah.
To go, we're back to right. No, it needs you to get down in the dust. And the ground with people and
descend. I love this phrase from Malcolm Gladwell. I read this in a book a couple years ago.
He's amazing.
He is descend into the particularity of the story. Descend into the particularity of other people. If we don't do that, we are left with contempt and anger.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Is that from Talking to Strangers?
I think it is from that book, Talking to Strangers. Ooh. Yes, that's really good. Goodness.
I have not. Yeah. Okay, behind him on Malcolm Gladwell.
So there's a book list for our 10 listeners.
There's also a great podcast where he talks about that, and he uses country music as a study of it.
Yes,
it's King of Tears. It's a great podcast.
I like his Psychology of Dragons. That's my personal favorite.
We'll link a couple things. We've referenced a lot of resources. We'll link those in the description.
And that's what we're trying to do with this episode. And the next one is just really provide you all with some practical application and some tools and resources of how to not thrive, but flourish.
Yes, right.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. Hit that like button, subscribe, share this, please, with your friends and family. And God bless you. Thanks for tuning in.